Okay, today I want to talk a little bit about something I've written a couple books about. That's the hero's journey. And a lot of people have heard that term. It's very widely used. In almost every movie you see, you can kind of find this hero's journey somewhere. But to give you a little background on it, Joseph Campbell was one of the first guys to really talk about this and really kind of delineate exactly what it was. In his sort of classic, what he called the monomyth, another way of saying the hero's journey, there were 17 stages. And basically these stages he found were pretty universal across cultures, across different time periods, and these are kind of things that heroes go through throughout history, both fictional and non-fictional, frankly. So I got the idea to write about people in sort of contemporary society and see where they fit. Does this stand up? And so one of my books, the first one I wrote on the subject, was called Barack, Lance, Oprah, and Rudy, Exploring the Hero's Journey in Contemporary American Society. And so what I want to talk a little bit about today is Lance Armstrong. But just before I get into that, just give you a little bit more on the actual hero's journey. Campbell really summed up all of his work into something, a phrase that he said was "follow your bliss," and by that he meant just sort of figure out what it is you're passionate about, figure out what your heart wants, and follow it. Beyond money, beyond what people expect of you, that is a key to happiness, according to Campbell. And one quote I took from him, Hero with 1,000 Faces, is recommended reading. It's kind of the book. He really explains a lot of this, but it's for when the heart insists on its destiny, resisting the general blandishment, then the agony is great, so too the danger. Forces, however, will have been set in motion beyond the reckoning of the senses, and sequences of events from the corners of the world will draw gradually together, and miracles of coincidence bring the inevitable to pass. So this kind of supports what I was talking about in terms of, following your bliss and kind of sticking your neck out there into the unknown to follow your dreams. You'll find guides, you'll find aid when you do that. To quote Goethe, be bold and mighty forces will come to your aid. But I think that's an idea. Goethe was definitely a big influence on Campbell. So, but you really kind of, and I'll explain some of the steps as I go through Lance Armstrong's life. But the first step in Campbell's hero's journey is called the call to adventure. You can probably think about something like The Wizard of Oz or Star Wars. You have somebody in kind of an ordinary world, and they step out of that ordinary world, and it's very scary, and it can be dangerous even, but the call to adventure precedes all of that. And for Lance, this was a chance to join the U.S. national cycling team that was competing all over the world. And he's only 18 at this point. And so he spent some time riding all over Europe, and he's learning some technique, and he's kind of a jerk at this point of his life. He's kind of a narcissistic guy. So the next stage in the hero's journey is called the Herald. And the Herald can be thought of as a mentor, probably from film. You might think of Obi-Wan Kenobi, or, as I mentioned in The Wizard of Oz, Glinda the Good Witch. But this is someone who kind of takes you under their wing and shows you, kind of gives you and helps you cultivate some of the tools you're going to need to succeed in this new world. And for Lance, this was a guy named Chris Carmichael. So this is his teacher and mentor, and he really gives him a lot of friendship and guidance, and he talks to him about strategy. So before this, Lance was just kind of a bull in a china shop rider. He's just kind of a full speed ahead kind of guy, and Chris Carmichael taught him a lot about strategy and how to ride as a tactician. And another stage now, I'm not going to do them all just because that would be kind of cumbersome, but I'll hit the high points that are relevant to Lance's life. One of them is called The Road of Trials. You can think of a movie maybe where the montage kicks in or something, but this is where like somebody kind of is getting their ass kicked for a while. And we can really relate this to our own lives. Maybe a period of, we're going through a divorce, or we've really had some problems academically, or we've just broken up with a significant other, but we're feeling very down. And it's the road of trials, and our lives just don't seem to be clicking. And this is really a period of great learning. And when we get to look back on our lives, we find that this road of trials was a very formative period of our lives. And so for Lance, he's finishes last a lot of his early races. And plus he's not making friends. He's disrespectful. He doesn't really have a lot of I guess, understanding of the sport in terms of teamwork and that thing. He's a bad teammate, and cycling is really a lot about teamwork and being a good teammate, and he's none of those things. So another stage as we proceed through the road of trials is seizing the sword, and you can think of this as like maybe going back to early mythology of like yanking the sword out of a difficult place or something like that, like actually taking up arms, whatever those arms might be, to fight. And in Lance's case, a gauntlet had been thrown down in U.S. cycling. There's 3 big races in U.S. cycling. There's the U.S. Pro Championships, and then there's premier races in Pittsburgh and West Virginia. And at the time, this is 1992, $1 million was offered to any rider who could make a clean sweep of all these races. It's never been done before. And so Lance won the ones in Pittsburgh and West Virginia. And so at this point in the U.S., this becomes kind of a big deal, the U.S. Pro Championships. And Lance wins it, and then he wins the World Championships later that same year. So this is big. So he's becoming a sort of premier American cyclist, but he's not quite on the world stage just yet. In fact, he's never finished the Tour de France. And so he spends a couple years there, and he's doing okay, but he's never finished the race until 95. He finally finishes, and he finishes respectably, and then he feels like 96 is going to be his year. Which brings us to what we call the apotheosis. And this is sort of the moment of a person's life where everything crystallizes, where everything just becomes all the things we've learned, all of our pain, all of our suffering, all of the things we've worked for sort of crystallize into a moment of clarity. And then it's a defining moment in our lives, this moment of apotheosis. And so for Lance, this is, he's like I say, he's poised to become a really premier cyclist internationally. And he starts getting these very severe headaches and coughing up blood. And he gets this extreme pain in his testicles, which have swollen up to huge size. And he goes into a doctor because he feels like he needs to get this checked out. And he finds out that he has testicular cancer, it's spread to his lungs, and it's really quite advanced. And they give him a 50% chance of just surviving the cancer. And it's also spread to his brain at this point, and spreading rapidly. And he has a testicle removed, and he has to figure out what he's going to do about chemotherapy. Well, one thing that happens at this point is they tell him, okay, the chemotherapy is going to be necessary, but this is going to really dramatically reduce your lung capacity, and so racing as a career is over for you. And so Lance, this is just devastating news to him. This is all he's ever known. And something comes along where he has another option, a treatment protocol, bleomycin, I think it's called, and this is a man named Dr. Stephen Wolf who suggests this, and it's extremely aggressive and experimental at this point. And so Lance decides to go this route, and this allows him to sort of keep his lung capacity, and it just seems too good to be true to him, but it's dangerous as well. So for Lance, again, he's faced with this 50% survival rate, and the risks are enormous. And after 3 weeks, he undergoes brain surgery to remove the cancer, and it's highly successful. And he wakes up, and he actually starts to believe for the first time that he can beat this cancer. Now, this is a huge moment because not only does he believe he can beat cancer, but some kind of switch has been thrown in Lance Armstrong right now, where he develops this kind of tenacity that he's never had before. And he begins voraciously reading survivor stories, medical journals, anything he can get his hands on about people that have beat cancer. And he begins to visualize himself beating the cancer, and it becomes kind of a burning desire. And amazingly, he starts riding his bike again at this point. Now, he's still in recovery, and he's not riding competitively, but he's getting on his bike again, which at one point seemed like it would be absolutely impossible. But he's just enjoying kind of the simple pleasures of riding. But other things are going on here, as sponsors have pulled out prior to this, and so he's under some financial strain, and he just doesn't quite know what he's going to do at this point. But this is when he starts a foundation for cancer patients. And like I say, he's been known as a selfish and self-absorbed person for most of his life. And this opens up another side of his life where he begins to see that it's not just about him. So he starts probably, arguably, one of the most effective cancer awareness programs of all time. And of course, we see the yellow Livestrong bracelets. And Lance makes the remark, "Cancer was the best thing that ever happened to me," which seems like an extraordinary thing to say. But if you think about the ripple and how much he's affected other people, it makes some sense. But moving through the stages now, there's the refusal of the return. So the U.S. Postal Team takes a chance on Lance, and he doesn't do so well. He finishes 14th, and then he finishes 19th, and he starts sulking, and he doesn't want to race anymore, and he gives up cycling. And the next stage is known as the Magic Flight. So at this point, Chris Carmichael, his early mentor and coach, he takes him up to the hills in North Carolina, and they just ride in the mountains, and they're talking, and they're going back to some of the things that they've been through together. And it's kind of an amazing thing happens. He begins to sort of recover just the pure joy of cycling again. And so at this point, the next stage, and this is pretty common in any hero's journey, is the return. This is kind of like the hero's been down, and this is when he comes back. And so for Lance, he finishes 4th in the U.S. Pro Championships, and he moves to Europe, moves his whole life to France, and he's starting to do well. And so you can think of this as like the Rocky montage. He's starting to get a little bit better each time, and until he begins to crystallize the idea that he's going to take on the Tour de France again. This is in 1999. And this is the next stage, which is known as the ultimate boon. So this is the 1999 Tour de France, and the first trial is the prologue, and a couple people have already broken the record at this point, including Alexander Zul of Switzerland, who's a favorite. But Lance kind of crushes the record on the first trial, and he and Zul are dueling it out on TV, and America has now gotten behind this story. So it really seems like he has a chance to win, and they're having this sort of fierce battle in the mountains, and Lance is getting a little further ahead, and the last stage he rides into Paris, and Texas flags and U.S. flags are just going nuts, and it's just such an incredible moment for him at this point to come back from where he was. So the next stage is Master of Two Worlds. So you have somebody that's kind of been to the other side and back. And so for Lance, he has the Cancer Foundation is doing wonderfully. He's devoting a lot of time to that, but he's also wins the next 6 Tour de France's. So he becomes almost an unbeatable sort of presence in the sport during these years. And of course the final stage is known as Freedom to Live. So this is a hero, and he's been through battles, he's been through victories, he's been through probably a little bit of everything at this point. But so the final stage is known as Freedom to Live. So we have a hero with some of the toughest challenges behind him, who now has the opportunity to kind of live and reflect on where he's been and live in peace. And so for Lance, he retires at the age of 34, but he's got a lot of other things he's wanted to do. He runs the New York City Marathon in 2006, which he said was the hardest thing he's ever done. But Livestrong continues to become a huge force in cancer awareness, and you have kind of a transformed person here. So it's really kind of an amazing story in terms of sort of where he's been. At this point, he's a good cyclist. In fact, he's a premier cyclist, but he's not the greatest that ever lived at this point. But something about having cancer helped him channel something else. And so I think this is probably a good takeaway for all of us when we're experiencing these moments in our lives where we feel like we've been knocked down. It's not that we've been knocked down. It's just we're learning things during this time, and we're learning things about our own resiliency and our own tenacity. And I can think of no greater example of this than Lance Armstrong. But I think it applies to our everyday lives as well. So anyway, it's a fascinating story. I've read several books on his as I was writing this. And so this is kind of an introduction to the hero's journey. And again, I didn't go through every stage there, and there's more. But I think it was a great example to kind of introduce people to the hero's journey. And I encourage you to read more. Again, my book's out there, but you don't have to read mine. I would really recommend reading Joseph Campbell's The Hero with 1,000 Faces. So thank you for listening in, and that's all for today.